I know, I just said that.
Raven, can we just all step in and get your phone?
Can we use you as a hotspot? Your pocket.
I'm going to call the committee meeting of Monday, August 25th to order. Kathy, roll call, please.
Okay, greatest.
Here.
Carol? Here. Mark?
Present.
Simmons?
I'm here. And let's see, first item on the agenda is audience comments. Kathy, do we have anybody signed in?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is presentation and discussion of tentative fiscal year 2015 budget. Ms. Lavelle?
Good evening. Let's see if this is going to work. Okay. You're going to kind of see some of the same things, but let's just run through again. I think everyone got a copy of the 3-ring binder back in July, and then I hope you've had some time to review it. So what is a budget? Basically, a budget is a roadmap. We talk about what revenues we can expect to come in, and we talk about what expenses we are going to expect to go out. We use assumptions in our budget because, again, these are things that we're not 100% sure on. We do know what salaries basically will be based on the scattergram. We know basically what our general state aid is going to be based on the claim numbers and the proration that the state board has done. But again, some of these things are assumptions that we make going forward. They are not actuals. Actuals will happen at the end of the year, and I'm going to actually go over briefly the actuals from last year, and these are still estimated actuals. The audit is not 100% complete yet. You will get a copy of the audit in October. On the revenue side, our greatest revenue piece, of course, are our local property taxes. And on state side, you're looking at general state aid, your mandated categoricals, and some grants. And on the federal side, your largest is your grants. So let's talk about our property tax. We're going to be receiving the second half of the 2013 levy, which, as you know, we're due August 1st, so those monies are already coming in. We'll be looking at the first half of the 2014 levy, which in theory will be 55% of last year's levy, because that's how it's billed. We're making an assumption of 97% collections because that's what we've been seeing in the last several years. As a matter of fact, last year's levy came in at 97.04% collected is where we're at. This is small, but it is in your binder. We are looking at, for the 2013 levy, we'll be receiving about $21.8 million, and actually we're looking at the spring collection of 2014 will bring in $10.8 million. And then our first year prior, which is the ones that we're just collecting now, at about $10.9 million, for a total of about $22 million. That's what we're looking at for property taxes. On the state side, general state aid, the foundation level is still remaining unchanged at $61.19, and that's been in place since 2009. Remember, how much we actually receive of that $61.19 depends on how much local resources that the district can generate with property taxes. So you take your local resources and you subtract it from the $61.19, and really District 161 receives $1,700 per pupil. But was prorated again, the general state aid down at 89%. So we're expecting, we should have gotten about $4.4 million. We're expecting with proration about $3.9 million, and that's a loss on proration of almost $500,000.
How long has the 89% been in play?
This is the second year we've been at 89%.
This will be the third year.
Third year now? Third year. Got Mike Francis from PMA. He's going to follow me right behind me. Mike and I have been working really closely all summer long. So when you finish getting my estimated actuals and my budget, Mike's gonna jump in and give you what the 4-year projections are on the PMA model. So we've been working really closely all summer long to seamlessly give you the full financial picture.
The proration at 89, what was the number before that? Was it 100, or has it always
We
been?
were at 93 one year.
It was,
90.
this is the third year at 89, the year before that it was at 95, and then prior to then, it's always been 100. So not until 4 years ago did it start actually having a prorated number. That was unheard of prior to
Just keeping
2000.
the foundation level steady and this now.
Well, the foundation
changing.
level actually used to grow.
Right.
And then
But
the first thing they
since
did was cap, it used to grow 100 or 200 a year, and they got to 6119,
Yeah.
and it's been there, as Fran said, since 2009. But after it was there for 2 or 3 years, then they started saying, well, we can't even afford that, we're prorating it at 95. Instead of lowering the foundation level,
Yeah.
it's better politically to say, well, we're only going to pay you 95 cents on the dollar.
Then we get to our mandated categoricals. These are mostly our special education employees, special education personnel, private facilities, your children receiving special education services. They used to be called the extraordinary claim for those of you who've been around long enough. And our transportation for both regular and special ed. And then a little bit more for an early childhood grant. That's our pre-K program, and bilingual education. On the federal side, you're looking at your Title I, which actually has reduced by 7% from last year. You're looking at Title II, that's mostly professional development, and that was a minor reduction, 1% reduction. IDEA, special ed, actually increased by 4% over last year's allocation, but basically flat. So if you take a look at all of our revenues by categories, you can obviously see local funds is the largest piece of property taxes and local fees at 76%. Your state's coming in at about 19%, and your federal revenues at about 5%, for a total of $30.5 million of anticipated revenues. By fund, your revenues for the most part are coming into your education fund. Transportation coming in second with O&M third. The reason transportation really is so high is because when EAVs decreased on our property taxes, we started having to accumulate our revenues where we could, and transportation was where we could. So we would rather have it in ed and O&M to offset some of our deficits, or where we can place the money as transportation, and that's why you end up doing resolutions to move money from transportation into ed and O&M. All right, so let's talk about the expenditures. This is just a whole bunch of pictures because there's so many different ways to categorize our expenditures. We can look at it as a fund. Your major fund being, of course, your education fund. Okay, your second one would be your operations and maintenance fund. You can look at it by function. Where are things charged? Is it regular education? Is it special education? Is it professional development? Those kinds of things. You can look at it as an object. Is it a salary? Is it a benefit? Is it a contractual service? In your binders, we went through all of that. I gave you by fund, I gave you by function, I gave you by object. So you should have been able to see in pretty good detail where all the money is going. So let's look at it in picture format. By fund, your major fund is the education fund. That's where everyone's salaries and benefits, where all the teachers are, where all your special education is, where your administration is. The meat and potatoes is in education. Your second and third, and pretty close at this point, is your operations and maintenance. This is outside of construction. I am not putting any construction money in here. We've kind of moved that whole capital projects and put it to the side. And we are just dealing with your operational budget here, okay? And so your operations and maintenance, so the maintaining of the buildings, your salaries and benefits for your custodians and maintenance staff, your heating, your electric, your gas, okay? Then comes your transportation, which we know is increased this year, but that's another major expense here. And then behind that, you have your debt service, the payment on your bonds, and your IMRF and Social Security, so benefits. By function, so this is what within the school district are we doing this? Really, your biggest here is your regular education. Those are all your regular education teachers, okay? Their benefits, the supplies that we do to maintain those classroom experiences. Special education starts popping up over here above the line, as does operations maintenance again, maintaining the buildings, and pupil transportation. Okay, so that's really where the bulk of your money is going by function. The state lumps certain functions together. Okay. The number one being instructional. So once again, that's where the majority of your money is going, right into the classroom, into instructional support. Okay. Then beyond that, you've got support business up here. Operations and maintenance are included in that subcategory. And you've got support central. That's where you're going to find all of your administration and so on, and also I think transportation is up in there too. Is that clear?
No, you do support administration, and uses administration is also in central.
No, administration, oh, you're right, administration is probably in here. Central, I think the key here is administration. That brings it up. By object, salaries and benefits. Purchase service is where you transportation. So again, you can see where it falls. Other objects, that's your bond, and that's your principal and interest.
Fran, what's your opinion on the new one?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
The new
On
bond.
the new bond. We're done.
Yeah, because you're done with the old paint mill ones off last year.
Right.
It is in order.
As of right now, our estimated actuals for 13-14, as of to this date, we brought in $30.3 million. We had anticipated 29.7. State made some final categorical payments in the fiscal year of 13-14 that I was expecting to see in July, but they made them on June 30. So that brought some of this up. From the expenditure side, we had budgeted $31.6 million. We're coming in at $31.4 million, so slightly under budget. Our one-time money, we had budgeted at $1.5 million, and we're at 1.4. And that one-time, of course, is continuation of iPads. It was the Western Avenue roof. It was the Normandy Villa parking lot. So we were anticipating almost a $300,000 deficit on operations, and we're ending up at about a $360,000 surplus for operations for this fiscal year, this 13-14 that's just ending.
And the surplus is coming from what?
Just really revenues being higher than we had anticipated and being able to hold a little tighter, about $200,000.
So the payment that you got on the 30th that you weren't expecting was about how much? Do you know off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head,
Okay, because I'm wondering what really, I'm wondering what of that 361,000, how much of that is the payment that you got that you weren't expecting?
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, we saved $200,000 in expenses. We
Okay.
didn't do $200,000 more. But we also got in about $500,000 more than I was expecting at the end of the year, and the majority of it is coming right here, sitting at the state level.
Right, so I guess my question is, aside from the extra money that you got, is there a way that you can take that out and tell us what that operating surplus or deficit would have been but for the extra money you got?
Well, but for the extra money, but for what actually happened, I'm saying it would have been $300,000 deficit.
So it wasn't that we spent $361,000 less, it's just that we got more money than we were expecting.
It's a combination of the two.
Did you, I'm sorry,
Because we did spend $200,000 less than what we had
Okay,
budgeted.
so you did spend
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm
Absolutely.
trying to understand.
Right here. I mean, we had budgeted $31.6 million in expenditures, and we only did 31.4.
Okay.
So we did actually spend $200,000 less than what we had budgeted that we would spend.
Okay.
On the other hand, we also
Got
took
it.
in more revenue than we had anticipated.
Okay.
Okay. So all things being said, that's the way I want my budget to go.
Right, no, right, I'm just trying to.
Yeah, okay. Now, for this year's budget, we're anticipating $30.5 million to come in this year. We're anticipating $32.1 million in expenditures, which gives you a $1.5 million deficit, of which $693,000 are what we're gonna call one-time expenditures. It's still your iPads, the last 21st century iPad purchase. And it's $200,000 of bond and interest payment that we're making from our fund balances that we had anticipated doing when we put these bonds on. Okay, so that'll be 2 years worth of $200,000 being paid for out of fund balance towards our principal and interest for these next 2 years. Okay,
So we're paying ahead of time?
no, we're funding it with the
Oh,
200
right, I'm sorry.
cash balance. Okay. That's how it's structured the deal. So you are looking at just under $1 million of operational.
Money that was owed from the state that you weren't expecting to get in by June 30th, does that clear the docket in terms of what we're owed?
Yes, it does.
By the
They are
state?
caught up at this point.
Okay. So it was money you felt we were gonna get eventually, it's just a timing,
Right, it was just a
was
timing
it
issue. Yep.
unexpected surprise?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And they made them on June 30th. Yeah.
Sorry, Brandon, does that include the, what I understand is that the year that, or the state is behind in transportation reimbursement, or is that still the same? Am I understanding this correctly, that,
The state prorated transportation, but they made the payments.
okay, so they're all caught up on that as well? So all their back payments are now caught up?
This is going back to actually when I first joined the board, the question about actually projecting and working at a deficit is just still kind of blowing my mind a bit. And we're still projected that way. How long, I mean, do we sustain? I don't know if this
You're
question is.
beautiful, because that
This is
goes
the
right
next
to
one?
Mike.
Okay, because I'm like watching deficit, and I'm looking
Yeah.
reserve, and everything.
So
else
let's
is
talk about, okay, here's where we're standing, here's what we're bringing to you, so let's talk about now projections. So I'm gonna kind of, with my introduction,
Before we move on, I'm sorry. So back to this 900,
no, 5.
905,
Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
not, I got it.
So-
Basic colors.
Aside from the money we know about, that's still another $500,000 that we are working in a deficit.
Yeah,
Can
bottom
you-
line is you're gonna be taking $1.5 million out of your cash balances.
So I'm wondering, can you give me a Cliff Notes idea of what that other $500,000 consists of?
You need from here
Right,
to
so,
here.
so we
It's
know
this $693, it's that $200,000 of bond payment,
Okay.
and it's your iPads.
No, I thought that the 905,000 was outside of that,
No. This is the total deficit.
right?
These are the one times of this 1.5, so your operational piece is 900,000.
Right. And so my question is, of that 905, we know what about 400,000 is. What's the other $500,000? If you
Everything
can, I know,
else
but can
that's in
you,
here.
is it?
I
and the reason
can't,
I'm
I
asking-
can't
this
tell
is why
you
I'm asking.
what specifically it is, it's everything you choose to spend your money on.
And that's my question, because, for example, when we are renegotiating a contract with, say, the FEA, we run that through the PMA model, and we kind of know what that looks like. But we don't always do that with everything that we decide to spend.
The
so-
only monies that are really focused, if you will, where we can only spend it on certain things are really your grants, your state, your categoricals is a reimbursement of special education money already out the door.
Right.
Your state grants are for specific programs,
I get
and
that.
your federal grants are for specific programs. Everything else, which is the majority of your money, is local funds for you to spend at your discretion as you see fit.
Right.
So when you say, well, which is it?
I guess this is
It
kind
could
of,
be the lights.
well, this is what I'm trying to understand. So if I have a personal budget and I exceed my budget, I can say, oh, I bought those $65 shoes and that's what blew my budget. I'm asking if you, for example, the security system that we've put in or some other things that we've done, I'm trying to figure out which of those we had room in our budget for and which of those kind of exceeded our budget.
And I
You
guess
can't break
my
that down for me?
response to that is, that's the board discretion as to what your priorities are and how you want to spend your money.
I get that. I'm just asking if you can say, you spent $140,000 on this, you spent $75,000 on this, you spent,
Yes, and that's what that whole binder is where we spent everything or
I
anticipating
know,
spending
it's a
everything.
big binder, friend. I was
But
wondering if you
Can I tell you what were the things that
The
took
big
you
ticket
over the
items that
edge?
took us
Well, the
over the
big
edge.
tick- But are those the ones that took you over the edge? I
That's
guess
what I'm
is,
asking you.
well, I don't think I can give you that answer. That's what I'm saying to you. I don't think I can give you that answer. You're spending more than you're taking in. So what are your priorities? What is it that is important to this board to spend money on? And what things can we leave aside?
Right.
But that's not,
I'm not
For
asking you to
me
say
to
which
tell you
decisions
what
were
to
good or
do.
not good.
well,
I'm asking
yeah.
you just to say, well, these are things that you did kind of give like this, I know it's in here, but,
Right.
and I have my notes.
And
which are
I
at home. I'm
have
just
given
wondering
you
if
a
could-
document that says, here's some things you may want to start your conversations
Right.
about. And that doesn't mean that those things weren't good and valid things to spend your money on. I believe that everything you have spent here is good to spend money on. I believe everything that you have done has been in the best interest of children.
I get
But
that.
you have more expenditures than you have revenues coming in. So now comes the hard part. What is it that you want to spend your money on and what is it that you don't? And none of those decisions are going to be easy because none of the things that I put in there are easy to cut.
Right, and I think what you're looking for me is to look, you think I'm asking you to say this was good and this was bad, and that's not what I'm doing. What I was asking is if you could just remind us of the, a few
The
things
are
that were
in here,
big.
yeah, your blue point is in here, so those police pools are in there. Now, mind you, some of that money was grant money that
Right.
you couldn't have spent otherwise.
Right,
Okay. Your whole 21st century, you got a lot of money in computers. But that was a commitment that the board made. There's that in there.
okay,
You have very low class sizes compared to a lot of school districts.
right.
So you have that. You have a lot of support staff compared to a lot of school districts. But again, these are all very
And that's
conscious
all I,
decisions.
yes, that's all I'm asking you for. I think you're asking me to tell you good or bad decision, for you to tell me that. That's not what I'm looking for from you. I was looking for what you
Right.
just did. These are the things that you spent money on in significant amounts in the last year.
I
and those
can
are the
tell
things that-
you where I think you spend in excess of the norm for the area.
Okay.
But it's up to you to decide whether that.
I know, you can stop saying that part, I know, I get that part. I'm not trying to put you in a
You
good
get
bag.
paid way too much for Jerry over here, so, you know.
Throw him under the bus.
Okay, I'll go sit back and try to explain the difference.
Okay, all right. So, to get to Mrs. Harrell's question, and I'm going to, Kathy, can you bring up the PMA, please? I'm gonna kind of do, because there's another item on here, and I'm gonna do I'm gonna jump around a little bit. What you're about to see is the culmination of what goes into the PMA model, and Mike's gonna walk you through some of this. The model reports, when we finish, he gave me 91 pages worth of reports. I'm not gonna bore you with all of it. Mostly it's good for me, okay, and it's very good for me. And one of the items on your agenda is gonna be to continue our relationship with PMA in this model. But Mike and I did work an awful lot, like I said earlier, close together this summer with estimated actuals, plugging those into the model, then plugging in my actual budget that we gave you, then he takes that and moves it forward as projections, and he gets back on the phone with me and says, hey, Fran, take another look at this, because here's what the model does, is this makes sense to us, and we have a lot of good conversations about that. So I'm gonna turn the clicker over to Mike, Mike Francis, PMA, and he will take you through, Mrs. Hurl, what I believe is your question.
We're going to move to agenda item 4. Or is this still 3? Okay, Michael, go ahead.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Fran really focused on the FY15 tentative budget and showed you some FY14 actuals. The other piece that she mentioned is that working with our program called the Financial Planning Program, it shows you 5 years of actual history, and then in this particular case, we're going to see 4 years of projections based on that 15 model. So when you're looking at what is our deficit, how long can maybe we sustain these types of things, that's the type of what ifs or different scenarios that we played through with Fran and with the board. And again, this is just one. I'm going to show you a base set of projections based on a set of assumptions that I'm going to outline in this presentation. She says you've got 91 pages of reports. Obviously, we're not going to go through all that. We're going to hit the highlights of that reports for this particular purpose with the highlight of the assumptions also. But it's going to give you a good look at what the future could potentially hold with those assumptions. So as I mentioned, we have 5 years of AFRs, and normally the FY14 year is the basis for the budget, because we're kind of right in that middle period where the 14 year has ended, and your auditors are in their work right now, and your 15 year is not. 15 budget has not been adopted yet, so we're in that transition period between July 1st and October 1st. As districts are transitioning from one fiscal year to the next and getting actual information and actual budgets. But at this point in time, we have estimated actuals for FY14. They've not been audited numbers, and those are the numbers we're using in this model. And FY15, we have the tentative budget. And as Fran said, my numbers are, I think, within a couple $1,000 of hers. But we're using a projection model and trying to get the numbers as close as possible. But some of the formulas behind it are not exactly the same, and it's just I didn't want to override those models. But for purposes of this discussion, the values between the two are virtually identical. Here's just a couple other data elements in the model. So first, we're going to focus on revenue. You saw Fran has some bar graphs and some pie charts. This is just, again, a pie chart of your operating funds. And I think Fran's showed all 9 funds. You have 9 funds in Illinois schools. Our program focuses on, we can focus on any funds you want to, but typically we focus on the operating funds, so your 6 largest funds, which she mentioned: education, operation, and maintenance, transportation are by far your 3 largest. But we also have IMRF, working cash, and tort. So these are the pieces of the pie that make up your operating revenue for FY15. So from that point, how are we projecting those, or what assumptions are we using to project those pieces forward? The biggest piece is obviously property taxes at over 70% of the district's revenue. That piece is driven by the consumer price index, a national number, and the amount of new property that's added to the equalized assessed valuation on an annual basis in the district. So this first bar graph shows you the CPI in the dark blue, our actual CPIs over the last 6 years, and then the light blue is what's being projected for CPI into the future. So this number right in the middle, so right now the revenues that are coming in are on this 1.7 number. That's the number that was used for last year's levy that are going to be taxes collected now. The levy that the board will be asked to adopt in November, December timeframe will be based on last year's CPI, which came out last January. So you have about 11 months in advance knowing that before you adopt your levy, and that's a known number. That limits you to the maximum amount you can receive in additional property taxes from existing taxpayers a year from now, based on this upcoming levy. Beyond that, we're looking at all to the future at 2.2. In the year-to-date CPI so far is just over 2%. But again, it's on a calendar year basis. So from January through July, it's just about 2 or 2.1 year-to-date. And we're projecting 2.2. Again, but this is not for revenues. This would If it turns into the 2.2, that would drive the 2015 levy, December of 2015, for taxes collected the following year. So we're looking at a couple years into the future before taxes would change potentially substantially one way or the other from what the projections say. For new growth, you have really minimal new growth here. You see the history shows about $1 million. You had 1 year at 2.6. If this chart went back to 2005 or 6, you actually had much more than that, $7-8 million worth of new growth. So even though this projection might look high, it's not high compared to what the district had in new growth in the past. And you'll see on a revenue sensitivity analysis that this is not bringing in tremendous amount of new property taxes on an annual basis. This is not the additional dollars you receive, it's the value of the property that becomes taxable. Other assumptions, you get a few percentage points in other local revenue. The biggest piece of that is CPPRT, or the corporate personal property replacement tax, which is a tax paid by corporations, paid to the state of Illinois, and then funneled back to all taxing bodies in Illinois through the Department of Revenue. Each year, the Department of Revenue gives all districts, an estimate on what they're expected to receive. And the estimates from the Department of Revenue just came out in the last couple of weeks. And your budget is exactly what they estimated, which is the best budgeting practice for CPPRT, is to use what the Department of Revenue tells you that they think you're going to receive. And their numbers are always pretty good, within a couple percentage points. So that piece is about $210,000 of revenue for the district on an annual basis, and we're projecting that at a flat level. Your investment income, unfortunately, you've got fund balances to invest, but you don't get a lot of return on those. All school districts don't. You did 7-8 years ago. Today you don't get a lot, but there is an assumption on that is another local revenue and a 0.4% annual rate of return. While all other revenues are projected at their current budgeted level. So no changes. We're not taking anything out or adding anything to it. On the state side, you get the next big piece is general state aid, and that's really the wild card here because that's the piece that we had a lot of discussion about during Fran's presentation. You don't know what the future holds in this particular item. The 6119 has not changed now for, I think, 6 years in a row. The 89%, this is the third year at an 89% proration. What does the future hold? It's hard to say. Will it go down? Who knows? It depends on lots of things, but it all happens in Springfield. Outside of anyone's control here in terms of how schools get funded into the future. In the model, the results I'm going to show you are continuing, no changes at the foundation level. So again, 6119 staying flat, and the 89% remains constant also. That's what the results show that you'll see in this base set of projections. Same thing for your categoricals. We're not changing categoricals also. You've had cuts in your categoricals, and the biggest one has been transportation reimbursement reductions. Even though they caught up in terms of paying you, in terms of timeliness of the payments, it's at an all-time low in terms of the amount of reimbursement. But again, we're carrying that lower number on a flat level moving forward. Same thing with special education and all your other state grants. You do have a one-time in this year's budget, which props up your revenue in this particular year just for FY15. You've got, is it 2 grants? Two different grants in the O&M fund from the state that result in about $150,000 worth of one-time additional revenue for this year. We're not counting on those in the model into the future. And federal is also projected flat. Just a quick sensitivity analysis on these items. The biggest thing that you're driving your revenue, because again, your biggest piece of revenue is property taxes, and the CPI is by far the largest driver of your revenue, consumer price index. We were projecting 2.2%. If it comes in at something different than that, lower or higher, it can go either way, there's a floor of 0 and there's a cap of 5, so it can't go beyond that range, and 2.2 is just below the middle of that. But for every percent different than that 2.2, it's $220,000 more or $220,000 less to the district's tax base on an annual basis moving forward. The new property was projected at $1.5 million. Remember I said that didn't bring in a ton of additional revenue. But if the new property starts to grow again, it will bring in additional $55,000 approximately for every addition of $1 million worth of value that's added to the EAB. If the state gets its financial picture in order and starts adding money to the foundation level again, like it did every year prior to 2009, for every $100 added to the foundation level under the current formula, you would yield about $225,000 of additional general state aid dollars. However, if the proration gets deeper, you lose about $44,000 per every 1% of proration. So as Fran's budget, again, her going back to her presentation, you lost almost $500,000 in general state aid this year when you compare what 100% funding would be to 89% funding, which it will be. Does anybody have any questions on revenue? Okay, so those are the assumptions for revenue. These are the pieces of where Fran showed you, you can show expenses by fund, by function, or by object. These are shown by object, again, focusing on your 6 main operating funds. Salaries and benefits, obviously the largest pieces of the puzzle, with the way the state mandates all school districts to show their object budgets in these different categories. And next we'll go over the assumptions in the model that are driving these pieces forward. For all employees, for salaries, we have actually your contracts built, any contracts that you have, we have them built into the model through the year that they expire. And then beyond that, or for employees that don't have contracts, there's an assumption of a 3% annual salary increase. For health benefits, there's a 5% annual increase to the board contribution for employee health. And then this piece is interesting, this TRS pension reform. If the state, there was a lot of talk in the last year or so about the state, why we're in this pension mess is the state has not funded TRS or any of the pension systems like they're supposed to. And one of their solutions is to pass that cost back to all local districts. It says, we can't make the payment, so we're going to give the payment to you. You'll be forced by law to make the payment, and you'll make the payment, and the pension system will become better funded. And it would become better funded because, like IMRF, you're by law required to make those payments in front of everything else. The state just says, well, we'll pay you later, and we'll pay you later, we'll pay you later, and they never get around to it, and all of a sudden they're $100 billion in the hole or whatever the number is. But if they pass that back to you, there's the different methodologies. How would they pass that back to you? Well, one of the methodologies is that they would phase that cost in over a period of time. Now they said they know that districts couldn't take that full cost on in 1 year. So what if they phased it in? At 0.5% a year of their obligation, if they pass that on to you, it would result in about an additional half of this $135,000. For every 1% they pass back, it's an additional expenditure to the school district. Again, you'd have to make to TRS of about $135,000. That's built into the model 0.5% each year, starting next year. For your other items, purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, and other, we have CPI annual increases, which is that 1.5 or the 2.2. As Fran mentioned, your construction expenditures are taken out of the operating funds and moved all of them into site construction and life safety, which are funds I'm not showing on this particular model. And those are really designated for those types of expenditures. But included also is the technology plan, and there's multiple phases of this, or multiple things that are going on. And we've got about $2 million built into the projections for technology plan over the next four fiscal years in the results of it. In terms of staffing, and we're focusing on just your teaching staff here, you have about 188.5 full-time equivalent teachers. And in terms of modeling, we haven't changed that number. We haven't added any teachers or we haven't subtracted anybody. Now, we have turnover in terms of retirees, that's built in, but the overall number of people that are on your payroll is constant in the model at 188.5. Finally, just some additional assumptions. We have no changes to the funding formulas. The big what if there is general state aid, and that's the big thing you need to watch as the information out of Springfield talks about that. No changes to the tax cap law, and that the board would continue to levy for and capture the CPI under the tax cap on an annual basis. As I mentioned, retirees, we've got 25 teachers that are already on the retirement track. And the year that those teachers retire, any incentives that the teachers get are built in. And the year that they retire, we're removing that higher salary and replacing that salary with a lower salary of an average spot of bachelor's lane step 7, which is about a $47,000 salary this year for a teacher in that step and lane. And then obviously the tentative budget is the accurate basis for the projections. Okay, so just a little bit of review. Again, this is hard to see, but you have a copy of it in the presentation. Hopefully it's a little bit easier to see there. This shows you a history from FY9 through 13 are all actual numbers. It shows you your revenue, local, state, and federal. So you got about $29.5 million in 09. And your estimated actuals in revenue are $29.2 million. So revenue has not really changed much in the last 5 years. A lot of that has to do with reduction. If you look across, you have less federal revenue. Because remember back here, you had ERA money. Remember ERA? It's been a long time now, but that's what boosted up your federal money, and now that's gone, and now your federal levels are much lower than they were 4 or 5 years ago. The state levels are lower than they were 4 or 5 years ago also. Some of this has to do with timing. You know, they got behind a few years ago, and now they caught up, which is why this number is actually higher than it really should be. Back to your question about what would it be if we didn't get that 5th payment? Because you got categoricals coming quarterly, and last year you got 5. You won't get 5 ever again, unless they fall behind again. So there is no more catch-up money. That is one-time money that happened in FY14. And the best you can do in FY15 is 4. And you'll be lucky to get 4. You should be hopeful that you still get 4. Otherwise, you might only get 3. So there's a good scenario that you might only get 3, and now all of a sudden you're going to sink your state revenue down again in FY15. But that would be money that they owe you. So this is where the state money kind of fluctuates up and down, whether you get 3, 4, or 5 payments on an annual basis. Expenditures are shown next, and really the key, if you're looking at are we adding or subtracting the fund balance, is this line right here in the middle. If it's blue, you added the fund balance, meaning your revenue is greater than your expenditures, and if it's in red, you subtract it from that. And sometimes when it's red, you did it for specific reasons, like construction or technology initiatives or whatever. You've made a conscious effort to use some of your fund balance for particular reasons. At the bottom, we have, so this is revenues and expenses, and whether you're adding or subtracting the fund balance. So what is the fund balance if you follow that down? In 2009, your fund balance was $21.6 million. And as a percentage of expenditures, we translate that into how much is that as a percentage of how much money you spent during the year. It's 76% of the budget of the actual expenditures in FY09. That, because you added the fund balance in 10, 11, and 12, that not only did the fund balance grow to a high of about $631 million and 110% fund balance, but then you can start seeing you drew that down. You had some expenditure, you had some one-time expenditures, you had some deficits in those years, and your fund balance is down to about $27 million, about 75%, back really to the level it was in 2009. So that's a history of where you've been. Now, the first column is exactly the same as the estimated actuals for 2014, and those match the Fran's estimated actuals to the dollar. And then we have the next column is the tentative budget. So again, this is, and these numbers match very closely to what Fran said, but here I've got $1.3 million as in the deficit. Again, some of those things are one-time items, and some of them are not. Some of them are structural items, and that goes back to that whole conversation of what's your priority. What, if you have a structural deficit, the board, and you want to do away with it, you need to make decisions on what are the highest priority items for the board. But you can see here in your projections, it's 1.3, it goes down to 617, but it doesn't go away. So you got about $600,000, what I would call structural imbalance, beyond the one-time items we had in 2015 moving forward. Now that being said, you have a nice healthy fund balance. You're at 75%, and with deficits, you would fall to just under 71%. Now the state financial profile score, you would still get a score of a 4 at this level, which is the highest rate you can get for fund balance to revenue ratio for the school district. So, you know, could you draw down the fund balances at that level? I would say yes, but this doesn't fix itself. It's not going to fix itself ever, and eventually you have to make a decision. Do we want a balanced budget, or are we okay with it? And if we have a deficit, what level deficit is okay for us? This is what that looks like graph. The red line represents the fund balance of the 6 funds that I'm talking about put together, and the growth of those funds with surpluses between 09 and 12 along the axis to the top. And then 13 is the first actual deficit you had. A lot of it had to do with the construction. And then same thing with 14 here. This is the budget deficit in 15, the $1.3 million down, and then the $600,000 or so on an annual basis falling. You can see it's a very slight angle down from where you're at, and actually it's higher than where you were in 2009, but a lower percentage, because as a percentage of expenditures have grown. So even though the number is higher down here, the percentage is less than it was in 2009. The other bar we have graphed is this $10 million line right across the top. We just want to show you where $10 million was, which is I believe the board's minimum balance for fund balance, and you can see that you're still, even in the projections, well above that particular minimum balance.
Can I clarify, just the $2 million is the board's minimum, is this board's minimum or state?
It's
This board's
board.
minimum, this board has a
We established
policy.
based upon
Has a
policy.
policy.
Yeah, that we added this line for this board because that's your particular thing. And when you do that, it's common. Boards have different policies, and we'll add a line like that to kind of give you a visual on, so you can see where the board policy is at versus where our projections are at.
When was that established in?
Year and a half, so
A year and a half.
it's part of the strategic plan.
Okay. So the individual colored bars represent the individual fund balance for each of the funds, actual and projected, for the 11 years that are shown, 09 through 2019. But putting them together is represented by the red line. So you can see how are we doing overall on the red line, but if you want to see the pieces of that red line, you look below, and most of your fund balance is in the ed fund, but you can see the ed fund is starting to, that's where the deficits are. The ed fund falling. Yes?
This is just me clarifying, I got the big picture and then, the individuals, that really helps. Are these, it's trying to be the right term, are any of these like restricted funds, so if we went really low in that particular fund balance, we couldn't move money, it's just one big pot, and we just.
It is, but you can't move this
We
one.
can't move those.
No, you can't move I or F.
Okay,
Yes.
that's the only one?
And tort, you can't move either.
Okay,
But the other ones, there's provisions in the state code to allow you to do transfers between ed, O&M, and transportation. Which, again, Fran mentioned that there's a resolution, the board did some transferring from transportation to the,
Part of this year's budget.
is it to the ed or the O&M, or maybe to both?
Split between ed and O&M.
And the working cash fund is really there to give you some money to get through the year on a cash flow basis, and you could also abate that or transfer that to any fund you need.
that's good, thank you, appreciate it.
Any other questions from the board?
Oh, were you finished or were you just?
Yeah, I'm done, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Can you go back?
To which one?
Okay. This one. Again, what I'm trying to visualize is, I see the big number, but what helps me when I'm thinking about this is, of that number, specifically the surplus and deficit line, right? Right. So maybe this is one. Can we go back another one? I'm looking to the past. Okay. We spend, right? And when you talk about it, you talk about the construction, and you talk about the iPads, but we also put that in with other spending that we've done. And what I'm trying to get a visual in my mind of that number. So for example, the FY 2013 number, the $2,585,000. How much of that is construction or technology? And how much of that is other spending that we as a board have decided to do? And I'm not asking you to say what's good and what's bad. I'm just trying to, in my mind, break it down.
Let's just go on that 2.5 million, which is your estimated actual for this.
No, that was actual, that's 2013
Because
actual.
of 13 actuals?
Yes.
And I'm not looking for exact numbers, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to figure out.
The majority of that was your construction and your 21st century, because that was your infrastructure year.
Okay, and then move to the next year.
And then the next year again, of that 1.1.
No, of the 6 million,
You know what,
Now,
that's got
what I didn't mention
bond
though,
and
is that
interest.
you've got some other things, the things that happen below the line, you sold some bonds, you transferred some money, and the net result was this number right here,
Okay.
1.1 million.
okay, thank you.
Okay,
So
that's
of-
the difference of fund
Of that
balance.
1.1 million, I'm not asking for every single thing, but it just helps me to think about it
Yeah.
when I know what's construction and technology and what's other stuff.
In that year, I could attribute every bit of the 1.1 to construction and technology.
Right. Now let's move forward.
Now, moving forward,
Yes, so now we get
of
to
that
the
1.3,
1.3, okay?
okay? Of that 1.3, I can say that about 600,000 of that is going to be for your one time. And the other 500,000 is going to be your structural deficit.
Thank you. That's what I'm trying to get, okay.
Right,
And
which is
then-
why this number goes, actually gets lower. It typically, if these were all expenses that you had on an annual basis, that deficit wouldn't get lower unless you had some one-time revenues that we weren't anticipating, but that rarely happens.
Right, and so we're pretty much, we've done all the roofs, right? We've done with them all?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and, are we finished with additional technology, or have we kind of?
Your iPads will be done, so we're looking kind of at where we go from here
Right,
right
but
now.
based on, like, say we don't buy another iPad, we've already paid for the ones we bought today.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, really, for the most part going forward, really your computer expenses are gonna be what I would consider your normal operations, the way we do business now.
Okay.
So I would take that for the most part, there's a few little pieces left, but for the most part, 95% of it, one time is done.
Okay, so now
The
when I
only
look
thing
to-
you have going forward is one more year of $200,000 of
Right.
bond and interest payment.
So that would take that 617,000 down to 417.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So, now, as I move forward from 2016, and we're talking about our structural deficits.
Now your structural deficits remain, so in 15, or 16, you're looking at about 420,000, 437, yeah, those are your structural deficits now moving forward.
Okay, so, part of that is contracts that we've already agreed to, teachers and otherwise. Part of that is transportation. So, and this is what I'm trying to get in my mind, anything we spend, so say we decide to buy new garbage cans for all of the schools, right? And that's not in what you would say are traditional expenses. If they're $5,000, that $5,000 is gonna add to that deficit.
Correct.
Thank you. That's what I'm trying to get in my mind. So, any cent we spend moving forward that's not
Beyond what we
regular-
already built into these budget numbers,
Okay.
yes, would add to your structural deficit.
Thank you.
Correct.
Unless there's cuts.
Well, yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, then we start getting into all kinds of stuff.
okay.
The other thing that would add to it is if the proration for GSA got deeper.
Well, yeah,
That
we
would
can't
lower,
control that,
you
right?
can't control that, but it would lower your revenue and raise this number up.
Right, right, no, I get that.
Then we can fantasize and say that they start actually stop prorating general state aid, and now you're
Right.
back to being.
If it was 100, that would wipe that to
Wipe
zero.
it out.
And thank you, because that takes me back, go back a couple of slides when you were, maybe, no, it must be this one. In 2009, 2010,
Era.
So we had money coming in
From the federal government.
that we don't get anymore.
Correct.
So even though our expenditures are lower, they're lower, we were getting in money that we're not getting in now, so that helped
Exactly.
drive the surplus.
Right.
Yes.
So part of the reason, and I'm just thinking this out loud, part of the reason, I'm not saying this is the whole reason, but part of the reason that we're moving into the red is because we're bringing in less. Yes, we're spending
Correct.
more, but we're getting in less.
Absolutely.
But could you quantify that for us, or like a,
Well, I mean, if you just take a look at the federal revenues alone, in '09 and '10, you were bringing in 2.7 to 2.9 million
oh,
dollars.
and then it's down.
You're down to 1.3.
Right. So that's $1.5 million right there.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
your total revenue was 29.5, and it's 29.3 here.
Right, so that's the one thing. And then, in 2009, it was still 6,119, right?
That would have been the first.
That would have been the first, yes, it
year.
would have been.
At 100%.
At 100%.
But it was 100%.
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Okay.
And transportation funding wasn't cut yet.
Okay, all right. See, I'm not being difficult. This helps me understand it better.
No, I'm glad.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, very much appreciate the presentation. Item 4 on the agenda, reviewing PMA contract, Justice,
Brian, go ahead.
Again, this model, it really is very, very valuable information in making decisions going forward and giving us an idea of exactly just what you see in front of you. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, the kind of conversations that, Mike and I have been having while we've been building these models as to, what's reasonable to assume, what's not reasonable to assume, what have we seen in the past, what do we think is coming in the forward, in the future, and giving you a model then of which to make these decisions based on, say, do we have enough money going forward or don't we? I certainly see the value in maintaining our relationship with PMA and continuing this one. So their contract is up, so I would encourage the board to continue.
Any questions from the board or reservations with bringing this forward to the next board meeting for approval? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is an update on the construction project. Do we do construction?
Believe it or not, we are.
Okay. Take it away, sir.
Thank you.
Sounds like some good news, huh?
Well, hopefully all of you have diligently read this. But, I did check today as I was driving down to confirm that we have poured the last of the foundation walls. So footings and foundations are in, foundation walls are there. Last progress meeting, we discussed when masonry work might start. And it will likely be after the 1st of September. So then you'll actually begin to see something coming out of the ground. Our first bid package was bid package A, had 3 contracts. All of the substantial completion of all that project did happen. Site work was probably 3 days later than we had expected or wanted, but it did get done. We can confirm that we do retain water on site. Before the storm trap, the structure was in, I arrived on a Tuesday morning, sometime in mid-July, after I think something like a 4 or 5 inch rain. And our hole, which was like 8 feet deep, 120 feet wide, 200 feet long, was within about 6 inches of the surface. The piping that would allow it to dissipate into the city's system by design was actually in place. And so it would drop about 2 or 3 inches every hour. But we know it was working. This morning, we're dry, and the Levitt Avenue detention pond had water in it, which I think is good. I believe all the opportunities to have way through the water to get to your cars will cease to happen again. We did notice one small spot out in the playfield area where there's some ponding water, and we're going to get that addressed. Plumbing work that was underground is all in and completed. The light poles are there, the light pole bases are there, and the empty conduit is there. So we've made significant progress on bid package A. The only significant remaining piece of that is replacing and rebuilding the current parking and drive area on the east side of the property line. And rather than destroy that and possibly not get it done, that will be reconstructed next year. And included in that is undercutting everything, going down 18 inches. But based on the loads that we put on it this summer, it would appear that it's subgraded in pretty good shape. So there might be money coming back next year as that proceeds. All of the life safety work at Western Avenue was done, which was essentially fire alarm work. System was tested and was operational. That was the most significant of the Flossmoor Hills. Flossmoor Hills work is done except for, I think, 5 punch list items. I will tell you that you have a fairly expensive sidewalk at Flossmoor Hills around the park, around the playground on the southwest side. It explains why the paving that was there was in such bad shape. They had put it on organic soils. And so we had to cut some organic soils out and put new stone in and bring it back. And we predict our new sidewalk will last probably 15 or 20 years instead of maybe 5 or 6. We're in good shape. We really are in good shape. We've discussed how we can maybe speed things up. Our goal will be to have Scott and staff moving into the new classrooms about the end of May. At least you'll have all summer to move into that. And we will be completing some life safety work in the junior high that next summer as well. And then we'll be in the art room, existing art room, and restructuring that and cutting a corridor through that gives us the connection and the loop around the building next summer. But we're making good progress. I would tell you, essentially, we're ahead of schedule probably 4 or 5 days, even though we've had from a contractor's perspective, a terrible summer. Way too much rain. On the other hand, it did help keep the dust out. We do try to pay attention to the neighbors. And Emery Harmon, our field manager, probably has introduced himself to every one of the neighbors around the perimeter. And he always says, if you've got a question, you've got a comment, if you're worried about something, here's my card, here's my cell phone, and give me a call, and I'll be happy to talk to you and understand what your concerns are. We do have payment applications that will be submitted to Fran, coming out of our office tomorrow. Based on where we are with the site, the stormwater structure, just the concrete structure itself is worth about $380,000. And it costs almost another $300,000 to install it, prepare for it. So there will be a fairly significant payment application coming. But they'll kind of settle down, my guess is, into the $250,000 or $300,000 range from this point forward. All the contractors are performing well. No issues with their interest in doing a good job and doing it right and doing it correctly. So from that perspective, I think we're going along very nicely as well. I do think you're posting pictures on your website. Typically, we probably will have digital images up to 200 a week. Every time I'm on a job site, I'm typically taking 40 or 50 pictures. Then Matt Tepper comes down and he does the same. And Emery has a camera and he's probably snapping 20 to 30 pictures every day. So there will be, at the end of the project, a good visual record of the project as well. So be happy to share those with you, but you find it pretty boring.
Thanks for the update. Any questions from the board?
If you do want to come to the job site, just give us a heads up. Make sure we've got.
At the next board meeting, I'll be bringing forth a proposal to settle the 2007 and 2008 property tax objections. The objections are really out there, the majority of them, for loss and cost. What happens is when you put on your tax levy, the Cook County automatically adds between a 2.5% depending on fund for loss and cost, essentially non-collection of taxes. So the bill is actually increased by what your levy amount is to make sure that you get 100% of your levy. Since we have collections of about 97%, clearly 5% loss and cost would be considered in excess. So these objections are on the excess amount. In total, the settlement actually will cost you about $2,000 in refunds, which is really next to nothing compared to what the loss cost is. So I'm going to recommend that you do accept the settlement offer for $2,000, and that is for both 2007 and 2008 combined.
Any questions? Okay. Number 8, Atlas Oil Company, the PTAB.
We also have a settlement offer from Atlas Oil for their PTAB. They originally were looking at a reduction of approximately $15,000, and the settlement offer is at just under $6,500. So clearly, it's better than what they were anticipating originally, and our attorneys seem to think that that's a reasonable offer. So again, we would recommend that you approve that settlement offer with Atlas Oil.
Questions? All right, number 9, Hawthorne Hills Bus Route.
At our last board meeting, we had a discussion about those bus routes that were not reimbursed by the state of Illinois. We have one bus route that is out there. We brought that to the board last year in November, and that's at Flossmoor Hills bus route. We said we would review it again, so upon request, I'm bringing that information back to the board. And that is the bus that goes up Village Drive. It goes up and then it comes down. That bus route is a bus route that we have originally because it goes out to other places. So it has to go up Village Drive and then come back down. Just to let you know, we tried Safe Routes to School, tried talking with them. So on the east side, we were going to put a sidewalk in or try to. That didn't work out as far as that information. Last year, we had a discussion about the west side. That's where the parents were mostly concerned about the kids crossing over the road to Village Drive. Well, last year, we had about 14 students in total that rode that bus. This year, with this information that I bring up on the west side, which was the concern that was brought forth to the Board of Education, there are 5 students that are riding that bus. And on the east side, there's a potential of 38 students. So with that being noted, there is a stop on the east side and the west side for that. I bring that to the Board of Education to have discussion on what you would like to do at this time. This is a non-reimbursable pickup for those children. And as far as a cost factor, the route is already there. So we're not being charged for a route. It's one of our routes that's there. However, for the potential of those children riding, the east side, it comes to approximately $13,500, and the other side, the west side, is about 1,750 students. Please be mindful that. $1,750. So with that being said, please remember or note that this is within 1.5 miles from the school. And with that being noted, it's not a hazardous area, therefore it is not reimbursed. So I bring that to the board, and there seemed to be an interest. I turn it over to the board to discuss, see where you want to go with it.
So when we talk about the jump in the number of students last year to this year, are those like new kindergartners coming in, or is it all over, is it dispersed?
It's pretty much dispersed. I don't have the actuals. Today was the first day of school. Of course, a lot of parents drove their children to school. This is a potential on what could ride. Last year, we saw, we thought there may be only about 8 students. We saw that there were 14 students that actually rode the bus on both sides of total. So what I bring forth is the potential of those children that need ride.
14 to 50, is that what I understand? Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because there are a lot of different numbers here.
Yeah, their first estimate was 50 students total. We have a total of 43 students that the potential of them riding on that, at those two stops would be non-reimbursable by the state.
Okay, and this year it was only 14?
No, last year was 14.
So last year it was only 14. We thought it was 8,
Mhm.
and it ended up being 14, which cost us around 7,000, 7,900, is that what it was? 7,900?
That was at $330 or around, or for them to ride the bus for the year. So that is a cost for them. It's a revenue that does not come.
And so the increase in the cost from what we anticipated for this year, that we did approve for this year, would increase by how much exactly? If all, you know.
If everyone rides, there's not a cost to the district as far as routes. But if everybody rides and it's $350 per person, that would be $13,500 for 38 students on the east side, or actually it's $13,300. On the west side, it's $1,750.
What I'm trying to make sure I understand is the money that we were spending additional this year that we actually approved was 330 times 14, is that correct?
That's how many we have ever
Okay,
raised.
so we'd be, you know, if this would be voted and we just voted on it and approved this, we would be paying an additional like 15,000. I'm just trying to really understand.
We're not paying anything.
It's a loss of revenue.
It's a loss of revenue.
It's a
I'm
loss
sorry.
of revenue,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry.
We're not paying anything
Right,
more.
it's not reimbursed.
It's not reimbursed by the state.
Okay.
It's not a hazardous route. So last month, or whatever, last meeting, we went through the hazardous buses.
Right.
This is being brought up now for discussion.
The issue is a uniform application of the transportation charges across the district, and this is one that's, we missed last year in terms of the charges, and I believe that we should have a uniform application of non-hazardous within a mile and a half across the district, regardless of bus route.
So my understanding, I remember the conversation very detailed because Fran went out, took pictures, and there's some people who went out, took pictures, and based upon the information they provided to us, although it did not meet the hazardous, that piece of it, there was enough, hazardous condition, there was enough communication by parents and then also our own staff going back and saying, this is really an issue, so much so that we actually voted and approved this. So I'm trying to figure out if it
Created another stop.
created another stop, okay.
Great.
So the extra stop we created last year is still there.
Okay.
Neither stop is deemed hazardous by the state, so we don't get reimbursed for it. And so the issue concerning this is that whether we charge these students who choose to ride the bus from both of these non-hazardous stops the same charges we charge every other student who chooses to ride the bus within a mile and a half on a non-hazardous stop.
Okay, so that, yeah, now, thank you, because I just want to figure that out. What I, what would help me, whatever my vote would be, is to understand the difference in just me living a mile away and I choose to put my child on this bus. I have to pay my $350, whatever that is the conversation around the children's safety, even though it didn't meet the hazard, it didn't meet that standard. It wasn't just that this wasn't within a mile and a half, it wasn't, there were some dangerous conditions here that although they didn't meet it, there was enough conversation at the board that we approved it last year. And so the question is whether or not we are going to now say, no, let's go back to uniform regardless if it doesn't meet that, right? If it doesn't meet that, even though we had these conversations with parents and our administration last year, that we're gonna say, the vote would be uniformly, whatever reason. If it doesn't meet that, it doesn't meet it, you gotta pay.
The safety issue
Okay.
is a separate issue from charging.
Okay.
Safety issue is taken care of by putting an extra stop in where one had not existed before.
Okay.
Done.
Done.
Not doing, no changes.
Done.
So that's not, so then, I think I'm understanding what you're saying. With this new stop, those concerns have now been addressed, right?
That is correct, but what happened last year with the stop was put in, but there was a no fee.
Right, no, I get, I'm thinking about the safety.
Okay.
So it's lost revenue.
So now it's just a loss, so the
Rephrase.
safety issue
It's been resolved.
is resolved.
And whether you want to choose to use it or not, we're going to, the question on the table is, just like everybody else, if you put it in the stop ordinance, safety issue done. However, if you choose to ride it, you have to be charged $350.
Whereas before,
We just did that year.
we didn't have, the safety issue was still out there. Am I
No.
understanding that?
No, we just did it
We
all
didn't pay.
We
together.
made the decision
Yeah.
to see if we would get state aid or if in the
Right.
interim we could redeem it. So we
Right.
chose
Right.
to err in the favor of the students
I
and let
get
them
that.
ride it.
I guess what I
To
think
revisit it this year in terms of
So we
charging.
said it'd be about a year, we did that in November, it's at the beginning of the year right now.
But I'm saying that stop did not exist when this conversation started, correct? This additional stop that has now made it safer for the children.
Right,
That-
on the west side of the road, it did exist because we had people paying.
Okay,
And there was, so when it came back around to its routes, came back down, on the other side, the west side, sorry, the east side was where the stop was because there was people that were getting on there, so the kids were crossing.
that's what it was.
From the
kids were
west side,
crossing the
right.
street, okay,
And that was the concern for the
And we had one
parents.
on both sides.
right, okay.
So the bus just kind of loops her back around and gets them on the other side of the street.
But it's still less than 1.5 miles, so
Both of them, right.
both of them. So it is to be consistent with what we have said as a district in general. So the question on the table is now, stops are there, safety issue done. If those parents choose to have their children ride, they pay $350, right, everyone else.
Okay.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions from the board, comments? Anybody have a problem with bringing this forward to the next board meeting for review and vote?
I
Okay.
do not have a question about what,
Does it require a vote?
Mhm.
Okay, then.
because this was such an issue with the parents from Baltimore Hills last year that brought up the issue, were they notified or just notified through the public hearing?
We didn't have a hearing or anything.
No, were they notified that we were visiting this as a discussion cost? But they weren't charged before, so that was, they're just
Right.
probably assuming.
No,
yeah,
they-
it's gonna go forward.
no.
So other than this, they don't even know that we're about to vote on this.
That's
One of the other issues from, I think, from last year, correct me if I'm wrong, was that they had not been charged because it was an oversight. Is that correct?
There's some that weren't charged, a few people. We caught it, it was with the, it was a glitch on our training software. So we came back and we said, you know what, we'll forgive what we didn't charge you, but from this point forward, we're going to charge you.
Okay.
And then it continued.
Do we have a general number of, I mean, I'm sure that there's got to be bus stops within a mile and a half in other parts of the district, correct? I mean, is this the only?
No, there's other ones.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually have kids that live 3 blocks from some of our schools. Parents got to go to work early.
Right.
They have the bus pick them up, they pay the $350 a year.
Okay.
Is it accurate to say that we don't believe there are any other non-hazardous routes within a mile and a half where we are not appropriately charging students to ride the bus as per our policy procedure?
That is correct.
This is the lone standout. That's
Okay.
why I think it's prudent for us to address.
Right. Do we have a number? And the reason why I'm asking this is that if I were a parent in, whichever one of the grade schools and, suddenly I now have to pay, I would probably feel better knowing that, well, all these other schools, say 100 other students spread out, they have to pay too. So it's not the local issue, it's across the district.
The number of students in the district that pay for busing,
Right.
I'm sure we have that.
We do.
I think that would be helpful.
And the other thing that I would ask is, we should by then, by September, know the actual number of students as opposed to how many it could be. If I could, that would be good.
When I bring this forth, they have to give the potential.
Right, no, I get that, I'm just,
No, I know.
by then we won't have exactly, we know it may not be 50, it would be somewhere. Okay.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Thank you. Next item on the agenda is review of revised policy. Is this considered a first reading of these policies? I believe these were posted for public consumption, there's a number of pages here. Mr. Dustin, I don't know if you want to summarize these or just open it up for questions. I'm assuming all board members have at least done a cursory review of said policies.
Yeah, these, just to remind the board of the process, we belong to press. And what press does is they go through the policies. They have a panel of attorneys that take a look at all the new laws that are coming through. They have a discussion. And then they take that information and they distribute it to all the school districts that are in the state that belong to press. So what you can see is we just, as part of the recommendation from me, there's a description of each of the policies, et cetera. There's a lot of revisions. There's a lot of law that has been changing, and with that, you might see that, you know, what happened on this policy from 2 years ago. Maybe there was one thing that so everything that is given has been reviewed by several attorneys actually, and here's the information we bring forth. Now, it is a school board policy. This is one of your major roles as a school board. You can take a look at it, and if you want to modify or adapt, or you don't want it, you want to change it, you can have our attorney write a special policy. That's at the will of the board, of course. But everything here, I've gone through it, and it really, you know, we're already working on being in compliance with everything. But this information that we have, after approval, will surely be done, of course.
And so the plan is to do a second reading and approval at what point?
At the next board
The
meeting.
next regular board meeting.
That's correct.
So does anybody have any questions or comments on the policy draft changes at this point?
I have one question. Looking at the rationales from 230 on, everything makes, you know, perfect sense. You know, it's updates in the laws and various things. I was curious in terms of policy 220, what the significant rationale for the change was. I didn't understand that.
Yeah, if you take a look, I looked at that today.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to sort of load up, so I don't.
All right. I'll go over it quick and then I'll show you.
Okay.
Later, and we'll try to get these up. We're having some problems here. But anyway, what they did is they added this. It says, organizing the board after each consolidated election by electing officers and establishing its regular meeting schedule, and thereafter taking action during lawfully called meetings to faithfully fulfill the board's responsibilities in accordance with state and federal law. So remember, after your election, we were sworn in and we elected officers at that time, et cetera. That is what that means.
Okay.
They've added that, so that is something somebody thought that was important, that we need to do. And you have to remember, if there's something on these policies, that means there's some boards that aren't doing this.
Okay, so that really meant that, so in terms of us, we've been doing that anyway.
Yeah, so we're really good. It just really solidifies the process for the Board of Education.
Okay. And so the thing at the end that was lined through, is that?
Yeah, indemnify, protecting, and ensuring against any loss or liability of the school district. They took that off of there, that we're protected by law.
Right, but we have other language for indemnity later on, don't
They
we?
replaced it with a new line 7.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's the red line at the
Right.
bottom there.
which is just a revision of that one.
Right, they've added more to it to make sure that it's
Gotcha.
more protected. All right.
So for the most, these aren't changes that you and your staff decided needed to be made. These are the changes that press said,
Yeah.
because of changes in the law, this is what we need to do.
Right, if I have questions, as you notice, you'll see on them, I always write approved in my name, so that's like the screening phase, and then I bring it to the board for all the readings. But if I have any specific questions on anything, if there's been a law change, I'll definitely, I'll talk to my cabinet, say, have you heard of this, any of your conferences? And if it's something that we can't figure out, I'll call the board attorney to help clarify the information. But it's pretty good. We can also call ISB, we can call press, I've done that before, to ask, what does this really mean? And they give you an explanation for it, and we're fine. It's a really good process, and this Board of Education does a nice job keeping up on their policies, because they're easy to get behind, as you can tell. But policies come out 2 to 3 times a year, and that's why we get so many. So, for example, we have several this time, but it all has to come out during that. Okay?
So I would encourage another detailed reading by everybody and bring any additional questions to the next board meeting. Does anybody have a problem with bringing this forward for second reading at that time? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is executive session. We will be going into executive session for matters relating to personnel and litigation. School Code 120/2C1 and 11. I anticipate us being in executive session for 30 minutes approximately, after which we will return to open